All right, so we are going to go ahead and get started. My name is Coach Crystal. I help oversee the PB-Thon organization, and with me I have Adam, who is a registered dietitian, who is going to be walking us through just some basics around sports nutrition, things that you all should be keeping in mind as far as what you should be eating pre and post exercise and game, some hydration tips, and also he'll have some time at the end for some questions. And then once he wraps up, we will play a quick game to give you all the opportunity to win a prize. So if you don't have a cell phone near you, whether it's yours or your parents, just grab that because you'll need that at the end to participate in the game. And just so you know, the game will be questions based on stuff that he's covering. So make sure you're paying attention. Adam, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can share yours.
All right. Well, thank everyone for coming out. I'm just going to give a quick intro, kind of some of my background, and then I'll get started with the presentation. So like Crystal said, I'm a registered dietitian, which is basically you have to get a 4-year degree at a university that'll, has a nutrition program, and then you go to a post-grad program, very similar to like nursing or PA school, in terms of you work with another dietitian usually in a lot of hospitals or things like that. And then you sit for an exam after. It's usually about a year-long program, and you sit for the exam. Once you pass the exam, you get the registered dietitian license. So I've been a dietitian for about 3 years. Currently, I work at UBC. I'm the campus dietitian. So I do a lot of work with, mostly with dining services, but also with the athletes there occasionally. I have a pretty good relationship with the sports medicine director, so she'll refer students to me, as well as any student organizations or things like that. But, I really do like to do the athletics, and I think that's probably the, most enjoyable part of my job in terms of, it's very interesting, something I'm definitely passionate about. But we'll get started with the presentation. All right. Okay, so basic sport nutrition. What we're going to go over, again, nutrition basics, that'll just kind of be general stuff, not really, it does pertain to sports nutrition, but just kind of general, jumping off point. And then the next basic item is going to be nutrient timing. And then all that means is what you're eating before, during, after, whether it's exercise, whether it's a game, any sort of workout, things like that, what's going to be most beneficial for you to get the most out of that fuel and hydration, in terms of giving yourself the best benefit to, increase performance. I'm going to go a little bit over vitamins, minerals, and electrolytes, and then definitely hydration, very important. I'll talk a little bit about supplements and kind of what those mean, and then we'll talk a little bit about goal setting in general. All right, so first, some nutrition basics. These are the 3 main, what they're called macronutrients. And basically that means that they provide energy or they provide calories. So whenever I say like energy or calories, I'm talking about the same thing. So carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Those all are going to provide different levels of energy depending on, what type of macronutrient they are, is also what type of food they are. So some examples of carbohydrates, obviously, things like bread, pasta, those are the ones that come to mind. But a lot of other things are carbs, so fruits, any type of sugar, any, whether it's like honey or just regular table sugar, a lot of the like maple syrup, also a sugar. So things like that are going to have, anything that's a sugar is going to have carbohydrates in it. Any grains, so like I mentioned, anything made out of flour, wheat flour, but also, things like rice, corn, barley, rye, any of those types of grains, even the ancient grains like quinoa or farro, those are also, pretty carb heavy. Legumes, so beans, chickpeas, lentils, those are all in kind of the legume family. Those have a decent amount of carbohydrates. They also have a decent amount of protein, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then really any vegetables, technically all vegetables have carbs. Some of the starchier vegetables like potatoes or butternut squash or pumpkin, those have a little bit more carbs, but technically all vegetables have carbs. They also have a good amount of fiber, which is just a kind of more complex version of carbohydrates. So when you think fiber, just think carbs as well, even though it's kind of works in your body a little bit differently, but it's still technically in that same grouping. Next is protein. Basically, animal proteins is what comes to mind first. Any of your meats, beef, pork, chicken, fish as well, fish, shellfish, all those have a ton of protein. Your dairy sources, the lower the fat, the higher the protein in your dairy sources. And that's just because there's, less overall fat in the product. So that means there's going to be more room for protein. It doesn't necessarily mean the higher fat products are any worse. They just have more fat, which is just kind of different macronutrients. Obviously dairy, eggs, definitely, they have a high amount of protein. Also, so you have some plant-based sources of protein. So anything of your like soy products, so tofu, tempeh, seitan is also meat, plant-based. And like your legumes, like I mentioned, so beans, chickpeas, lentils, they're kind of like a half and half, about half a serving of carbs, half a serving of protein. So those would also count kind of as a plant-based protein. And then the last section is fats. So dietary fats, obviously the first ones come to mind are your oils, butter, any of your fats in animal products. So, think about any of the fats in meats. The fattier meat obviously is going to have more fats, which, fats do have a little bit more calories than protein and carbs. So that's why, people kind of think of fats as having a lot of calories, is just because, per ounce or per gram of fat, there's more calories in that than a gram of protein or a gram of carbs. But so there's some other fats as well. Any of your nuts and seeds, those have a lot of dietary fats. Avocados are kind of one of those healthier fats. There are different kinds. Nuts and avocados are kind of in that healthier side of things, whereas your animal fats and high fat dairy is kind of the ones you don't want to have too much of. And then we'll move on from here. And so these are kind of some functions of the 3 macronutrients. So carbs is going to be your main fuel source. And that's what I'm going to talk about mostly when we get into the nutrient timing. And that's what's going to be most important whenever you're doing any exercise, whether it's cardio, whether it's weightlifting. Most types of exercise are going to use mostly carbs. They do use other things, a little bit of fat here and there, a little bit of protein here and there, but most of it's still going to be carbs, kind of regardless of what exercise, what sport, what workout you're doing. So you're burning mostly carbs, and your body has a very specific way of storing carbs. So once you eat it, it kind of gets stored in a few different places. It gets stored as a molecule called glycogen. Basically just your body's way of kind of packaging it and storing it, for easy access. Where your body usually stores this is in your muscle cells and in your bloodstream. There's also some backup stores in your liver, but that just kind of gets transported back into the bloodstream or into the muscles. So that's just kind of like your reserve tank. And then if you have excess sugar or excess carb molecules from eating, it gets stored further as fat molecules. So if your body's filled out the storage that's in the muscles, in the liver, in the bloodstream, then it'll just kind of store any extra as fat cells. Main functions are carbs. Again, like I said, they're going to be helpful for fueling your workout, going to be helpful for fueling during your workout. But also you do need them post-workout. Like I mentioned, your body likes to store carbs in that easy to package molecule called glycogen. So your body's going to want to refill those no matter what after you work out or after you have a game or after you do any sort of exercise. So usually whatever you eat first is going to get repackaged as that storage molecule, that glycogen molecule. So that's why it is helpful to have some carbs after you work out as well, because it's just easier for your body to take that carb and store it, because regardless of what you eat, it's going to store it as carbs. So even if you're eating, high protein or high fat right after working out, it's going to take some of that, whatever it may be, and kind of restore it as carbs or kind of convert it into carbs and then store it. So definitely important to get, before, during, and after. I'll definitely get into more detail about that in the next couple slides. Protein, main function is kind of, your muscle tissues and muscle cells, growing those, making those tougher, making those stronger, and making those bigger. So any of your, high protein foods, like I said, your meats, your eggs, dairy, soy products, your body's going to take a lot of the proteins in those food, use them to build more muscle. So it's going to break them down into the simplest building blocks of proteins, put them back together in kind of muscle cell molecules. And it also uses it for other repair. Any sort of body tissues are made up of mostly protein. So your body's going to use, again, the protein you're eating to kind of repair those, strengthen those. So, not just muscle cells, but everything, around the muscle cells, tendons, ligaments, skin, anything like that is going to get rebuilt or make, stronger or tougher with protein that you're eating. Obviously, most of the protein that we have in our bodies comes from our muscle cells. So that's where most of the protein that you eat is going to. Any excess is usually just, it just kind of comes out when you go to the bathroom. If you have, again, too much of really any of the macronutrients, it does get stored as fat. That's just how your body kind of stores stuff for long term. So that's kind of true with any of your excess calories, excess energy. In terms of some other functions, you can have a little bit of protein pre-workout. It can be helpful because it can just kind of jumpstart that muscle protein building. You don't necessarily want a ton, but I'll get into that again in a little bit. But definitely post-workout, very important for that process of repairing, rebuilding, making your muscles tougher, stronger, kind of more resilient. So I did talk about you want the carbs afterwards, but you also want the protein. So kind of a combo of those two is really ideal. Again, I'll get into that a little bit more. And then for your fats, those are really, really dense energy kind of storage. So like I said, any excess, food, excess calories gets stored as fat. Your body does use that in reserves. When you have nothing else left, it ran out of all that stored carbohydrate as glycogen. It ran out of, some other things that it'll use as like a last resort. Fat is what it uses kind of when you run out of all your other energy sources. It has a lot of energy in it, so your body can take a lot of energy from it, but it takes a long time for your body to break it down. So usually this happens after a very long period of time and very specific conditions. So for you to be able to burn fat, your body has to be running at a certain rate. If it's running too high, it can't burn the fat and you just kind of hit the wall. If it's running too low, it'll burn other things before it burns the fat. So basically it's just your body's very, very long-term energy storage, stores a lot of energy in a small package. Usually this is more important in your kind of endurance sports. Think like cycling or marathon runners will burn a lot of fat during that event. Now even with basketball, obviously, I've heard the thing where you're running 3 to 5 miles for a game. By the end of that, you're still burning a good amount of fat just because of the length of time. You may not be burning fat all the time because it's kind of quick bursts and kind of stop and go, but you're still burning some. So it happens regardless, but it just is really dependent on the time factor and the intensity factor. I think the bottom part is what I just mentioned, got cut off a little bit, but it really depends on the time and the intensity. Some importance of sports nutrition. So now we're kind of getting into that side of things. Really important for performance and recovery. Those are kind of the two biggest parts of what I'm going to talk about. Obviously, anything we can get, that's following the rules to boost performance, we want to do. And then obviously we want to make sure we're recovering correctly. We're, avoiding injuries. We're making sure we recover for the next day. If you have, multiple practices a week, recovering from the week so you have, a good game, that kind of thing. So those are kind of the two pieces of sports nutrition that are really the most important. Again, a lot of the stuff I'm going to say is going to differ person to person. I'm going to give pretty general ideas of some sports nutrition concepts. It will differ. It will differ on, depending on your age, weight, height, a lot of other factors. Time of year even makes a difference. Hydration status makes a difference. Obviously, when you have sports, with down to elementary school or middle school, that's going to be very different than high school, college, pro. Different approaches, obviously, if you're still growing, you're going to need different things than if you're fully grown. So it's very, very, changes person to person, but I'm going to try and give a good, well-rounded idea that'll help everyone a little bit. Some big things with, especially with your fitness, kind of communities, fitness products, companies, things like that. A lot of misinformation is out there regarding kind of fitness, athletic performance, in terms of supplements as well as a big culprit of that. So a lot of this is kind of, tied into big industries that you want to just be careful of if you are looking for different strategies, different products, and just want to kind of do your research a little bit, make sure you, have idea of what they're actually trying to sell you. This is one big thing I like to focus on is kind of athletic nutrition versus general nutrition. So some of the general nutrition, stuff I talked about in the beginning, obviously goes much, much further in terms of, healthy diet, healthy lifestyle. So you want to be doing that as a baseline. And then the athletic nutrition piece kind of puts on top of that. You want to put that on top. So it's not like you're replacing general nutrition for athletic nutrition. You're kind of general, good diet, well-rounded, things like that. And then placing the pieces of, specific to athletes on top of that. So for example, most people, you want to have about 3 meals a day, maybe 1 or 2 snacks, stay hydrated. Then, you put in, sports practice, an athlete on top of that, you would add things to some of your 3 meals, or you would add an extra snack before or after practice, or you would add extra water or extra electrolytes because you need it because you're an athlete. So there's kind of, you want to keep that baseline, but you just want to add stuff on top of that. You don't want to replace it. Say you have a big snack after a game or after a practice, you don't want to skip your next meal because you have that. You're kind of using that to refuel because you're an athlete. You want to replace it with your day-to-day. So that's a big piece of that. It's just kind of extra added on. Some of the rules for general nutrition can kind of be bent a little bit with athletes, especially as you get up into those higher and higher levels. For example, your simple sugars, where most people, you don't want to have too much of that all the time. With athletes, right before or right after exercise or a game or event, those simple sugars are really helpful and they can be, really beneficial. So yeah, you want to have those right before, maybe right after. You certainly don't want to have tons of those throughout the day, every day. Obviously, that's too much, but right around, again, the timing of it really makes a big impact. Also with things like sodium, salt, most your average person, you don't want to have too much sodium. It can lead to high blood pressure, things like that. With athletes, they almost have, no sodium restriction. Obviously, this is, a general statement, doesn't work for everyone, but as you get into, higher levels, high school, college athletes, a lot of them will, need to eat extra salt than they realize or than they think, because just they need it. It's one thing that helps with making sure your muscles are working right, making sure actually helps with kind of keeping your hydration status where it should be. It also helps with, it does link with kind of mental sharpness and stuff. If you're low in things like sodium or other electrolytes, it can be a problem for reaction time and things like that. All right, this is the big part, nutrient timing. This is probably the most important thing I'm going to mention today. Eating, drinking before an event, before a game, before practice, depends on a few factors. The amount of time you have before that practice, before that game, that's going to be a big factor. The type of exercise you're doing, how intense it is, and how long it is going to be a big key factor as well. So that's really going to change, what you're eating, what you're drinking, depending on those things as well. And also your personal habits, what you're used to in terms of eating or drinking before. If you're going to be, feel kind of sick, or if you try to eat stuff before you go practice or before you go to a game and you don't feel well, obviously you don't want to do that. Yes, you can kind of train yourself to adapt a little bit and to make sure you tolerate a little bit more food or don't get, kind of that upset stomach before if you're eating before. You can kind of work on that. But if it's really going to be a problem, it's almost worse if you force yourself to eat something and then you don't feel well, as opposed to just, maybe having something very small or kind of pushing it back a little bit sooner and feeling fine. So it really depends on, your personal habits, your personal, preferences in terms of, what you like to eat, how it makes you feel before you go exercise. Like I said, the stored carbohydrates is the big thing that we're going to focus on. That's really the key for the before, to kind of fuel for that event, for that game. And again, we can make adjustments, depending on how close you get to that event, that game. One big thing is with the types of foods that you want to eat right before. There's some things that can digest easier and some things that take a little bit more energy out of your system to digest. So those are the things that might, give you an upset stomach or make you not feel so great right before exercising. Big things are high fat foods and high fiber foods. So fat, out of protein, carbs, and fat, digests the slowest. So if you have anything, that's kind of higher fat, whether it's high fat dairy, if you have a lot of, fatty meat, or if you have like fried food, a lot of times if you go try and exercise right after that, you're going to feel it. It's not going to feel very good. You might get some indigestion, not feel really well, just because the fat takes a long time to digest. So if you're exercising right after that, it's probably sitting in your system, so you're not going to, feel super great. Fiber, kind of similar. It is, still a carbohydrate, so it's a little bit easier to break down than the fat, but it just does slow down digestion. It absorbs a lot of water, so it can kind of make you feel like you have a lot of water in your stomach and your GI system. It just does take a little bit longer again to break down. So that's one thing, is as you get closer to that game, to that event, lower fiber foods, not doing the whole grains right before, not doing the really fibrous fruits and veggies right before, can make a difference. If you have too much of those, you again can feel it. So those two things are definitely key, especially once you get into like an hour before your practice or an hour before your game. That's where you want to start kind of really simplifying what you're eating, what you're drinking. But also, on the flip side of that, you can have too much really simple carbs, really simple sugars. So say you had, like a soda or something. Sometimes there's a lot of sugar in there all at once, and it makes water kind of go into your digestive system. One that dehydrates things like your muscles, but also it kind of can make you feel like you got to go to the bathroom. It can make you, feel like kind of heavy, kind of bloated a little bit. So too much of the simplest sugars, even though they're easy to break down, they can cause some other things to go on that, does make it again, cause an issue. So it's finding that balance. Again, this is going to be kind of a trial and error if you want to try and adjust what you're eating. This will be very, depending on person to person of what they can tolerate, what works for them. So just a couple things though to keep in mind for general. A little bit more specifics for kind of before and after. Before, you want to make sure you're fueling appropriately the day before. So, having a well-rounded diet, again, maybe doing a little bit extra serving on the carbs, just because your body will still store some of those extra carbs from the day before. I know everyone's done like, a pasta dinner before a game or something. And, part of that does help just store a little bit extra carbs. It doesn't need to be pasta, but it can be, extra helping of potatoes or rice or whatever. An extra sandwich before bed, something like that. So want to fuel the day before, even a couple days before, if it's going to be a big, game, big event, really hard practice, even a couple days before can make a difference as well. Once you get about 2 or 3 hours out of like a game or a heavy workout, that's when you want to start adjusting what you're eating. So anything outside of that 2 or 3 hour range, so you have like lunch at 1 o'clock and then your practice is until 4 or 5. That lunch isn't really going to affect how that practice is. You're going to be pretty much digested most of that food by the time practice goes. So that wouldn't make a huge difference. But once you get, inside again, 2 or 3 hours, that's when you want to start adjusting a little bit of what you're eating, just to make sure you're going to get the best possible results for that practice, for that game, whatever it may be. Eating to your comfort level in terms of if you, are going to overeat and you're going to feel not well, you want to kind of avoid that. But also if you're going to undereat and feel kind of, gassed, pretty tired, you can definitely underdo it. And then you're going to feel pretty tired, not kind of get the most out of, what you could. So this again is a little bit of trial and error for everyone to decide, how much can I eat? What am I comfortable with eating beforehand? Maybe I can try something a little bit new during practice and then incorporate it on the day before a game if it works well. So, again, just kind of little things you have to tweak a little bit. The easy to digest carbs is the big key. The simpler, the better. Again, you don't want to do too much, but I would say 2 to 3 hours out, focus on the fruits, the lower fiber fruits like bananas, berries, sometimes the tougher skin fruits can have a lot of fiber like apples or pears. You could also just do like applesauce or the skin off the apples and just do apple slices like that. If the fiber doesn't bother you, then no big deal, but it might with some people. As you get again, maybe like 90 minutes out, hour and a half, you want to go even simpler. So I would kind of do very, very simple carbs like your, maybe white flour products. So like pretzels or crackers or, a piece of white toast with jelly on it or honey on it or something like that. Something very simple, easy to digest. Once you get less than an hour, you really want to keep things pretty simple. Maybe like, a sports drink, some fruit snacks, a couple pretzels still would be okay depending on, what you're comfortable with. But as you get really, really close, you don't want to have anything too heavy. Definitely want to include some fluids or electrolytes. And I'll get into that a little bit more with hydration, but electrolytes are basically, what's going to be in most sports drinks. So the big ones are sodium, potassium, and phosphorus. Most of your sports drinks like Gatorade, like Powerade are going to have some of that. Doing Gatorade or Powerade like an hour or 30 minutes before your workout or game is going to be great because there's some sugar in there. There's some electrolytes in there. You're getting hydration with that. So it's kind of a little combo of all three. It's why it, does so well in terms of, it's why they're popular. So those are great. But also you could do something as simple as, fruit juice. Natural kind of fruit juices have electrolytes in them anyway. So some of those, any kind of lightly salted foods, like I said, pretzels are going to have some of that sodium that has, that's an electrolyte. So definitely a bunch of ways to get it. But you do want to make sure you're getting your water regardless. You want to make sure, you can put an electrolyte source in that. You can have it on the side. Water is probably more important than getting electrolyte, but I'll get into that a little bit more with hydration. And again, like I had mentioned, try different strategies on your practice days. That's the best time to do it. It just gives you an idea of, okay, how am I going to feel if I eat XYZ. Some things to avoid. So I really avoid, right before a workout or something like that, don't try and just go too long without having anything. Don't eat nothing. Again, I would say if you're really having a problem, still try and eat something maybe an hour, hour and a half before. It really will help you, kind of boost your energy a little bit. Like I mentioned before, the high fiber, the high fat foods, those can be, kind of give you stomach issues. So anything, I would say 2 hours or less until your game or until your practice, I would try and avoid the high fiber, avoid the high fats. Eating any food that you haven't done before on like game day, that's a problem. Anyone who's tried to do that, if it's, doesn't work with your system, you're definitely going to feel it, and then you're going to not feel well for the game. So definitely avoid doing that. Again, like I said, don't force food if it's going to make you feel sick. Yes, it's helpful to have something, but if it's really going to make you feel bad, you don't want to do it. Consuming anything with, mild stimulants, so like even caffeine, coffee, don't have too much of those. A lot of the things like pre-workouts or energy drinks, too much of those, you're not going to feel good. Again, they can cause some stomach issues as you get up into high school and college sports. Having too much caffeine in your system can be, it can be against the rules. It can be illegal if you are tested, which is a possibility. And again, obviously there's also you can hit the wall with that if it's a lot of caffeine without, you didn't eat anything else with it, you kind of crash with that. So that's another, risk of those. And artificial sweeteners, those can cause some stomach issues. Definitely. So really avoid that, especially if you're having like a fruit juice or something. Those can be, cause some really bad issues with, you definitely make you want to go to the bathroom right away. Indigestion, things like that. So any of your fake sugars, that's what, I mean by artificial sweeteners. So look on like things like fruit juices are a big culprit. Some of your candies. So like say you have fruit snacks or gummies, make sure they're not the sugar-free kind. Basically anything that's tastes sweet, but says sugar-free is going to have a lot of those artificial sweeteners. And those can cause some major issues, especially if you try to exercise right. Okay, and this is kind of fueling during exercise. This will be most applicable for like a game, because most of the time, if it's less than 90 minutes of exercise, you don't really need anything. Maybe a little bit of water, but you don't necessarily need any food or fuel. If that's assuming you've had a little bit of something beforehand. But if it's going to be 90 minutes or less, you don't really need much. Maybe a sip of water here and there, maybe a sip of a sports drink. Anything that's greater than 90 minutes. So if you have a really long practice, or, I would assume a lot of the games will last longer than 90 minutes. So those is where, you do want to have a small amount of easy to digest carbs if that works with your system. Could be as simple as a sports drink, fruit snacks, pretzels, chips, something simple, very easy to digest fruit, banana, orange wedges, applesauce is great, fruit juice is great. Something quick, something easy, maybe about halfway through the game, or during one of the breaks, just something small. And then definitely you want to have your hydration, you want to have your water during. So usually, like I mentioned, if it's less than 9 minutes, you don't necessarily need water. If you're feeling thirsty, sure, have some. But if it's greater than 9 minutes, you definitely want to have about 12 to 16 ounces of water. So anywhere from like 1.5 to 2 cups, basically. And you just want to space that out, during the whole event. So kind of sip at it here and there. But definitely if it's going to be that longer time, you do want to make sure you're getting some water. All right, and fueling after exercise. So this is where the combo of the carb and the protein is really key. I would say within about an hour of whether it's a game, whether it's a practice, whatever, or any exercise, you want to have a relatively substantial snack or a pretty good meal within an hour of finishing that practice, that event. That's just going to help with, your body's ready to absorb those nutrients pretty soon to when you're done exercising. So it's kind of waiting for that. So getting it in within an hour is going to help you absorb as much nutrients as you need, refill those carb stores, and also rebuild that muscle or grow it to be stronger or tougher. Like I said, combination of carb and protein, really important. You also want to have your fluids, have your hydration. So about 2 to maybe 2.5 cups afterwards. Again, within that hour time, try and, refill your water bottle at that time, have it with that meal, with that large snack. So some good options for, getting that protein carb combo. Like I said, eggs, yogurt, milk. Usually the lower fat dairy is a little bit easier to digest, especially after exercise. Because you can still have some stomach issues if you have food too soon. So the easier to digest stuff is preferable. Again, it's going to depend person to person. But really, any of your protein options, you want about a 2-to-1 ratio of like protein servings to your carb servings. So for example, say you have 2 eggs with 1 slice of toast or something like that, or have a half a cup of yogurt with half a cup of granola. So it's about that ratio. But really, any combination of those two is going to be helpful. Like I said, the legumes. So if you have dinner, say you have like a burrito bowl or something, getting rice and beans in that, the beans is going to give you that protein and that carb as a good combo. So you're getting a lot with things like those. Chocolate milk, if you notice, is on both. That's kind of been big in the last few years of a recovery drink. There's been a really good amount of research about it in terms of it's got a really good combo of protein and carbs. So low-fat milk in general has a good amount of protein, but then you're adding it's chocolate milk, they're adding sugar, things like that. You're getting the carbs with that. Milk has some natural carbs in it already. So it's a really good combo. It's just a good ratio of carbs to protein. It's been shown to be just as effective as most of your protein shakes or protein bars in terms of helping refuel and helping rebuild muscle. It's definitely definitely a lot cheaper than those products. So definitely way cheaper than your protein bars, way cheaper than your protein shakes. So definitely a good option. I do it for after I exercise. I think it's great. Definitely good research backing it as well. And then hydration. So like I mentioned before, you're going to have your baseline hydration. So just to, have a healthy lifestyle, you wanted your baseline of water intake, but then you're going to want to put things on top of that depending on what you're doing as an athlete. So, on average, this is going to depend person to person. If you're a little bit younger, closer to 50 ounces is probably great. Adults, mostly you want to have about 70 to 80 ounces of water a day. And that's where you get the 8-ounce cups is kind of right in that range. Really it should be, a little bit more than that, but that's kind of where you get that saying. So it's about a half gallon, if you're measuring it out. It's really helpful to just carry a bigger water bottle. So if you have like a, 32 ounce water bottle, you only have to refill that 2.5 times to get that baseline water amount. So I think that makes it a little bit easier to remember. Another easy way to kind of get your baseline water is to make sure every time you have something to eat, have something to drink. So even if it's just a good tall glass of water with your 3 meals, with your snacks, that's going to pretty much guarantee you're getting enough throughout the day. And again, that's just your baseline. So once we start putting in exercise, you're going to add more to that. Like I mentioned, the during exercise. So again, this is really more important if you're going, that longer amount, but you should have about 1 cup every hour. So that's where you get, once you get larger than 90 minutes, that's where I said that's, about that 16 ounces or so kind of covers that same time frame. So about a cup every hour, again, just sip on it, fill your water bottle, before practice, before a game, just kind of sip on it throughout. And then post-exercise, like I mentioned before, you want about 2.5 cups right afterwards. And that's just to kind of replace the fluids that you lost during exercise. Because obviously, for exercising, you're sweating a lot. You're going to need to replace a good amount of those. And again, this is all on top of that baseline. So, if you're having a really hard practice or a really long game, you may need 110, 120 ounces of water that day. If you have just a pretty light practice, you might only need 80 or 90 ounces that day. So it does just depend. Definitely want to just focus on getting that baseline. If you feel like you're not getting there right now, focus on getting that baseline and then work on adding a little bit more with your exercise, with your, during and post exercise. But definitely hitting that baseline is what you want to focus on first. And then work on adding that extra stuff depending on what your exercise level or game, schedule looks like. Okay, supplements. So what I kind of define as a supplement is anything, if for athletes specifically, anything that you're adding to your diet in terms of to support performance, recovery, or overall nutrition. That's not like a food source in general. So any of your pill supplements, vitamins, minerals, herbal supplements, a lot of your kind of sports nutrition supplements like protein bars, protein shakes, pre-workouts, all those I kind of clump in that supplement category. Couple things to keep in mind with this. So these are supplements, not substitutions. So like meal replacement shakes shouldn't be replacing a meal for an athlete. Maybe you are having it after a game or after a practice to help with, that recovery. You're getting, using that as part of your protein source or part of your post-meal refueling. That's great, but you don't want to use it to replace your breakfast, to replace your lunch. So, they can definitely be helpful, but you shouldn't be replacing multiple meals. A lot of your herbal supplements are not regulated by the FDA. So anything that's a vitamin or mineral supplement is regulated by the FDA. So what's in the bottle has to be in the bottle, pretty strict laws with that. Whereas your herbal supplements, not so much. They don't necessarily have to disclose the amounts of everything. So it could say, a certain herb or something like that is in a product, and they don't really have to say how much of it is in there. So either it could be, way too much or way too little to really do anything. As well as they can, do things like companies can have a proprietary blend, which all that means it's their patented blend of XYZ, and then they don't have to, really say what's in there as much. There's even more kind of uncertainty with those. So a lot of those not really well regulated. There's not a lot that are, that I would say I recommend in terms of, there's a few that are well researched in terms of some herbal supplements, but it's kind of few and far between with those. If you're taking any herbal supplements for anything, I would say tell your coaches. Especially when you get into kind of like high school or college, some of those things can be, even mild stimulants, or, that even if they're over the counter, you can kind of get those, and they can kind of, if you're tested, you can, it can be over a limit. You can, especially with NCAA rules, has a lot of substances that are banned substances that are just over the counter that you can find anywhere. So a lot of those, just be very careful with. You can kind of go over the limit with those pretty easily with some of those things. Some of my recommendations, multivitamin, take a multivitamin every day. It just helps fill in the gaps with some parts of your diet. If you, are missing just a little bit here and there, definitely can't hurt. None of the amounts in your average multivitamin are going to be too much, even if you're getting it in food sources. So something can be helpful. Electrolyte drops or tablets. So, if you don't like Gatorade or Powerade, or don't want to do a lot of those in general, there's some good alternatives where you can get your electrolytes without having to buy those. So there's a company called Nuun, N-U-U-N. It's kind of like a little fizzy Alka-Seltzer tablet, but they have different flavors, and it's pretty low sugar, but it kind of tastes like Powerade or tastes like Gatorade. Those have a lot of electrolytes. Those are really good. You can also get just like a dropper. It's like a dropper bottle of electrolytes. If you add like 10 or 12 drops to a 60-ounce water bottle or something like that, just gives you an electrolyte serving. You can taste it a little bit. You can definitely taste it. Your water tastes a little different. It's not like bad or anything. It just kind of tastes a little minerally. But again, just a good way to get your electrolytes as well. All right. So this is kind of the section about goal setting, and this is kind of a acronym that's used in a lot of different aspects, but it's definitely really helpful with sports nutrition goals in general. So SMART goals, and so it's an acronym for want your goals to be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. So a good example of that is I will eat a carb and a protein after So I'll eat a carb and protein after every practice for the next 2 weeks. Obviously, it's very specific. You're talking about a carb and a protein. Measurable, you're saying you're going to do it X amount of days over the next time period. It's pretty attainable. You're only starting with a few times. It's only adding one thing here and there, and you're just kind of, it's something you most likely are already doing, but it's just one little extra thing to make sure that it happens. And then relevant, for athletes specifically, your carbs and protein are going to help with recovery, going to help with that refueling and rebuilding. So definitely relevant to what you want for your goal. And then timely, it's over a 2-week period. It's not saying, I'm going to do this every single time for the next month. It's starting small. Obviously, you want to build on that. But this is just a good way to kind of, if you want to make small adjustments, this is a good way to go about that. This will especially be helpful with, if you want to make small adjustments for what you're eating beforehand, if you're not sure how you're going to react to having a little extra food or changing the type of food. Starting small, maybe adding it, once or twice at practices throughout the week, or, once a week at practice, and then seeing how it works over the next 2 or 3 weeks, and then maybe I'll try it for a game. So definitely just a good way to go about things. Again, like I said, the acronym is used for a lot of things, but really helpful for kind of nutrition goals, I think. All right, and that's everything. Thank you very much. So I think we're going to turn it over to do Q&A if anyone has any questions.
Yep. So if anyone has any questions, you can type it in the